part that's delayed is the requirement of when you start using this new certificate. Other parts of the bill kick in July 1st, Mr. Chairman. But it would raise revenue in fiscal year 18 and 19.
Delegate Ferris. Mr. Chairman, if so many in courts have their fingerprints on this, it shouldn't take long to get it out of there for the committee.
Okay. All right. That said, we do have a motion to report. I see no other requests from the committee. So, okay. I did not, however, offer the opportunity to members of the audience who may be here to speak on this measure, who would care to speak on this measure. So I'm going to hold the motion in advance unless there is anyone here to speak. We begin in favor of this measure.
Mr. Chairman, Reggie Jones representing Altria. We're here in support of the bill. We appreciate the leadership from the retail community. No one ever wants change, but we feel like we work together to find the least offensive way and least intrusive way for the good retailers to be identified, so we can isolate and identify those who are not legitimate retailers. So we think this will be a major step towards trying to solve this unbelievable problem we have with cigarette smuggling. And it's a matter of brand integrity for Altria. Thank you.
Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeff Smith representing Virginia Wholesalers and Distributors Association. Our members are the first possessors of all tobacco products. We're the ones that sell food, beverage, and tobacco products to the retail community. And this has been a long journey to try and vet a better system for identifying the legitimate versus the illegitimate retailers that are out there in the trafficking, and we totally support this legislation and would ask that you move it forward.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Guy Rolling. I represent the Cigar Association of America. We fully support this bill and applaud the efforts of the Crime Commission in coming up with what we think is a very good solution.
Chairman, Chuck Duvall, representing S&M Brands, which is a tobacco manufacturer in Southside Virginia, and 7-Eleven, which sells some of those cigarettes that S&M Brands manufactures. We're totally in support of this legislation. It's a big problem out there, and this takes a step to try to address the problem.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, Brittany West with Hunter Williams on behalf of the Virginia Retail Merchants Association. We strongly support this legislation. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Jody Roth on behalf of Virginia Retail Federation. We'd just like to take the opportunity to thank the Crime Commission, Altria, and Tax for all the hard work they've done on this legislation and keeping us in the loop and at the table throughout the process. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Brett Massey, Virginia Manufacturers Association. We support the legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Mike Sherman with the County of Henrico. We have a very large active cigarette trafficking issue in our county. We've had shootings in warehouses when this have occurred. We have for several years now tried to thread this needle from different directions and have been involved with the process to generate this legislation. We support it.
Mr. Chairman, Steve Pearson on behalf of Reynolds American. Reynolds is very supportive of this legislation as well.
Mr. Chairman, Mike O'Connor representing petroleum marketers and convenience stores, and we too appreciate the Crime Commission and Altria and have taken a number of hours over the interim reviewing this in great detail and are very much supportive.
I think that's what we call a consensus. All right. Anyone who would care to speak in opposition to this measure? We have a motion to report the substitute with a second, and Delegate Cole.
Yeah, what we're trying to do is solve a problem that we didn't create. The root problem is the excessive taxation that other states place on tobacco products. And to try to solve that, we're making it harder
placing more regulatory requirements on our law-abiding retailers and distributors, and so, like I said, every year, it seems like we get, more legislation down here to try to solve a problem created by New York. And I think it's time we stop fooling with it. The real solution to the problem is for New York to lower their excessive taxation on these products.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say one thing. I agree with Chairman Cole in that we are often attempting to resolve problems not of our creation. But I will say one of the beauty of this bill is that it creates an expedited and a non-expedited process. And under the expedited process, there is virtually no burden on anyone at any level involved in the sale of cigarettes. It's all automatic because most have already been vetted with ABC or with other Virginia state entities. So that expedited process is quick.
Elliot Klein.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to thank Kelly and Cole for seeking to make New York great again.
Good luck with that.
Gladly support his campaign.
All right. Further discussion on House Bill 1913. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. All right, House Bill 1913 reports on a vote of 15 yeas, 3 nays, and 1 abstention. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Dodi Hugo, we are working our way through, and you are the last of those who have legislation which has come directly to the full committee. And this would be House Bill 1884. If you are prepared on, this is your own legislation. 1884 is the real property tax exemption for surviving spouses.
Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much. Again, I think we have a technical amendment adoption.
All right, there is a technical amendment to House Bill 1884. The motion to adopt. Delegate Klein moves. Delegate Borok seconds the motion to adopt a technical amendment to House Bill 1884. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Those opposed? All right, the amended House Bill 1884 is before us.
Mr. Chairman, again, thank you very much. House Bill 1884 is the enacting language for the constitutional amendment that was on the ballot last fall. That passed overwhelmingly. It provides the ability for localities to waive the property tax, the personal tax, real estate tax, for the surviving spouses of firefighters, police officers, and EMTs. It's similar, analogous to language that was passed, constitutional amendment was passed earlier, referencing that surviving families in military lockdown. And this is the enacting language that went through the constitutional amendment, and I would ask for its adoption. And again, it is permissive, it does not require the locality to do so.
All right, Delegate Cole.
I just wanted to emphasize that this is permissive for the locality and not a mandate, as previous legislation had been. It's real easy to be generous with other people's money, but that's why I want to support this measure, because it is an allowance and not a mandate.
Further discussion from the committee. Anyone in the audience who would like to speak to this measure? What is the pleasure of the committee?
Report.
All right, there's a motion to report as amended.
Second.
And a second. Discussion. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board. Just a moment. the roll. House Bill 1884, as amended, reports on the unanimous 18-0 vote. All right, so that completes the business that we had on full committee. We've had a report from Subcommittee 2, Delegate Klein. So Delegate Hugo, I believe, will turn next to your subcommittee report on Subcommittee 1.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. The committee met last week and reported out a number of bills. Obviously, we still have a number to go. First up, Mr. Chairman, would be your bill, House Bill 1415. And Mr. Chairman, there were two amendments that move the adoption of those amendments.
Are those substantive amendments? I honestly don't know myself. I think there's one to add a county.
Adds Warren County.
One adds Warren County. And I don't remember the second amendment. Are they both related to Warren County?
Has to do with the title as well.
Okay. So both of these, I'm sorry, Tazewell County? No, Warren County. Warren County is correct. All right, twice. All right, so first thing is on the adoption of the amendment.
Chairman, move the adoption of the amendment.
There's a motion to adopt the amendment. Discussion on the amendment. Hearing none, those in favor of adopting the amendment to House Bill 1415, adding Warren County, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Those raise your hands. All right, that motion passes. Delegate Hugo.
And Mr. Chairman, with the adoption of the amendments, it was the recommendation of the subcommittee 6-3 to report the bill, and I so move.
All right, there is a motion to report HB 14 as amended. Discussion. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board.
Mr. Chairman, next up was House Bill 1455, also from the esteemed chairman. There were two technical amendments, and I would move it on page 7 and 8, and I would move the adoption of those amendments.
There's a motion to add a couple of technical amendments on House Bill 1455. Those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed?
And Mr. Chairman, House Bill 1455 reduces from 20 years to 15 years the minimum age of a structure in a technology zone that is rehabilitated for commercial use and qualifies for certain exemptions. After extensive debate on the bill, it was the recommendation of the subcommittee to report the bill 10-0 as amended, and I so move.
Recommended report on House Bill 1455. Discussion on the motion. Tech work at the board, which is having some gremlins at work this morning. Motion is to report within the members will indicate their vote. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1455 reports on vote of 18-1.
Mr. Chairman, next up was House Bill 1518, gentleman from Virginia Beach, Delegate Knight. It was a sales and use tax dealing with automotive repair supplies. Requires the sales and use tax be collected on the separately stated charge of these supplies. We went through this on a number of issues on this, a lot of questions. This one was interesting. There was one of the questions was directed by you, Mr. Chairman. We asked everybody if there's any potential impact to the state, given the tightness of the budget. Under this one, there's no impact, potential unknown gain, no impact negative on the state. It was the recommendation of the subcommittee, there were no amendments. recommendation of the subcommittee after debate to report this bill 10-0. So moved.
Motion to report, Delegate Bloxham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just need to get reassurance from tax in front of the committee that we're gonna get a clear definition on how to do this. And the reason I say that, Mr. Chairman, where I actually play on both sides of this fence, I need to know when something is tax exempt to the repair shops, and I need to make sure the repair shops know when to charge tax, because this bill will change what has been in practice from the auto shop charging tax to the repair shop charging tax. And we need to make sure that on the bottom of the ticket, if I charge for shop supplies, that I'm covered without sales tax coming in and saying, no, you're not.
Mr. Haskins is definition meister extraordinaire. Mr. Haskins, can you give us?
Mr. Chairman, I've had several discussions with Delegate Bloxham about this. He's correct. This is a change from the long-standing policy of how the shop supplies were treated, but this is a change that the industry has asked for. The Department of Taxation will commit to work with all the affected parties to make sure if this bill passes, that everybody is on board and we seek their input so we can get clarity. Anytime there's a change like this, we try to work with all the affected parties, and particular in this case, because it is going to affect the way the auto repair shops or the auto dealers collect tax, and the way that the auto suppliers collect tax. So we want to get both sides together afterwards and have them help us as we issue guidance on this if the bill passes.
Bloxham,
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Delegate O'Rourke.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, well, the subcommittee chair or someone in the audience, I guess I'm puzzled why we need to do this. What segment of the industry has brought this forward? If it's no change in revenues, it sounds like we're just shifting from somebody who's collecting to somebody else who's collecting, and creating a little bit of a paper trail in the process. Can someone explain why we need to?
I don't see Delegate Knight. I do see a couple people perhaps coming toward the microphone, and you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Ann Gambardella with the Virginia Auto Dealers Association. While we did not request this legislation and saw it pop up, it will help our dealers with a little bit of confusion. There are certain items that they may buy for their own use, sort of a dual use item for their own use, and then also items that they charge their customers for, and there's always been confusion as to when you pay tax when you buy it, what do you charge the customer for, is the shop supply charge taxable, is it not? This will provide clarity and say we're going to tax it when the repair shop buys it, and then not tax, I think I said that right, tax it when the repair shop buys it, and then not tax it the other way. So everything that the repair shop buys, rather than having to figure out which is exempt and which isn't, when the repair shop buys it for use in repairing vehicles, whether it's essentially consumed internally by the repair shop in the course of those repairs, or whether it's attached to a customer's car, those sales will be exempt from tax, and then the charge that the repair shop makes either for a particular item or their shop supply charge, which would take in all those items that were consumed by their repair shop in the course of the repair, would then be taxable. So it creates a situation where you're not trying to figure out when and where to tax which and what. That is a confusing example.
I guess to follow, I'm trying to understand, when I take my car, which is very old, so frequently, to the repair shop, I get my itemized statement, here's what he did, here's the labor cost, and here are all the parts, and he puts a tax on top of those parts. Then there is at the bottom a shop fee.
Correct.
Which is the same no matter whether he's worked on it 5 hours or 50 hours. It is a flat fee absorbing the solvents, the towels, the whatever. If I'm hearing correctly, now there will be on that shop fee a sales tax.
That is correct.
Follow up if I may, Mr. Chairman. Even though my understanding that shop fee is rather arbitrary, and set by the shop. So I guess I'm puzzled. So when he bought the rags, the solvent, and all those other things he got from his auto supply store, was he paying tax on those items when he bought them then, but not on the water pump that he got from that vendor to go on my car?
That's correct, and that's where the confusion comes in, is the auto parts suppliers have to know which of those items is being charged tax when it's used and put on a customer's car for repair, which of those items is not. This just simplifies it by saying, we're not taxing it when the auto supply, or the auto repair facility buys it, we're taxing it when, at the customer repair order.
So then, the final question, I think, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm just trying, when I get my next bill, I don't anticipate my shop is gonna drop his shop fee. But now it will be added to the parts section, where he then at the end of it all adds tax on top of.
That's correct, and I think there's also been some confusion where the repair facility has been paying the tax when they get those materials, and then there are some folks that have been charging tax on the shop supply. So there's been a lot of confusion because there's not a distinct time that tax is due. It depends on how it's used after you've bought it from the parts supplier. So when you buy it, you may not even know whether it's gonna be oil that you use in the process of doing a repair or something you're charging discreetly for.
And I apologize, yeah. So, I presume the dealers have a tax exempt number that they're able to take to their vendor, so that we separate a legitimate dealer from, for lack of a better way, a shade tree mechanic who's doing it in his backyard, some of the neighbors.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I believe that Delegate Knight has a second piece of legislation you'll see in the subcommittee report that talks about how better to make sure that the auto suppliers know that the retailers are legitimate.
All right, I have 6 people on the queue on this momentous measure. If you'd like, we can take this by and let the proponent come and present his. Hugo.
And I think the discussion here eliminates the complexity with what Delegate Knight was trying to get at. But since there's a number of questions and to move the panel on, I would move this to go by to
the day. All right, there's a motion to take this bill by for the day. Is there discussion on that motion? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion to take House Bill 1518 by for the day, indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? So that is so ordered, and we will, that will appear next Monday. And you can, in the meantime, get your questions answered about automotive repair supplies. All right, Delegate Hugo, and I think, did we?
I skipped one, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
I'd like to jump back, I apologize, I skipped Delegate Warrock's House Bill 1417. It's a special assessment for land preservation. It prohibits any locality from requiring a taxpayer who's the lessor of a real property to reduce the lease for the purpose of determining whether the property is eligible for special assessment of land preservation. I think this is the one where the gentleman might want to jump in. There was a waterfront was created. No, that's sorry. But there was an unknown possible loss to localities. There was no amendment. There was a subcommittee recommendation to report 10 to 0. And if anybody has any questions, please let's so move the adoption of the bill.
All right, the motion was unanimously to report House Bill 1476. Delegate Warrock.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may, just so the committee fully understands, all this matter will do is ensure that local governments cannot, when they're getting information to see if property qualifies for land use taxation, they cannot require a copy of the private contract that the landowner and a farmer may have entered into. This has come about because at least one county has been requiring a Xerox copy of a private contract to verify that what you put on the affidavit saying it's in land use, that wasn't good enough. So this is just say, you can't get into requiring a private contract. All the other powers that
as if the local government was still there.
Right, and Delegate Hugo, you had a full hearing on this when it came before the subcommittee.
Yes, sir, and it was the recommendation of the subcommittee. There were no amendments. It was the recommendation of the subcommittee to report 10-0 on that same
Okay. Further discussion from the full committee? Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the motion to report House Bill 1476. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1476 reports on a vote of 17-0.
Mr. Chairman, next up was House Bill 1529 from Delegate Ward. It extends from July 117 to July 122 the sunset dates of the sales tax holiday for school supplies, clothing, Energy Star, water supply, and hurricane preparation products. Again, we've had a number of these in past years. They rolled all into one sales tax holiday a few years ago. Again, this extends the sunset, which was set to expire July 1. There were no amendments to the subcommittee. It was debated, and it was the recommendation of the subcommittee to report 10-0, and I so moved.
Motion to extend the sunset date on this multi-use sales tax holiday. Discussion on the motion. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board. The clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1529 reports on a vote of 16-0. Hugo.
Mr. Chairman, next up, House Bill 1565, Delegate Weber, dealing with green zone development. It authorizes localities to create green zone development zones to provide certain tax incentives and regulatory flexibility for businesses. This is, again, a good idea, trying to help on a number of these things. There were no amendments. It was debated extensively. I think Delegate Weber was here or still is here. People have questions. It was the recommendation of the subcommittee to report 8-2, and I so moved.
Motion from the subcommittee is, or the vote in the subcommittee is 8-2, and the motion is to report House Bill 1565. Discussion on this measure. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting machine. Clerk will close the roll. And the bill reports on a vote of 16-1. Delegate Hugo.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 1668 from Delegate Stolley. A few years ago, we did a similar bill, excuse me, pertaining to gold bullion. This bill exempts legal tender coins whose total transaction sales price exceeds $1,000 from sales and use tax. One of the questions was when this bill would go into effect. I know you've been in discussion with the patron, and I believe there's an amendment that delays the enactment of this provision until January 1, 2018. I believe that's okay with the patron. And I would, it was not done in subcommittee, but I would move the adoption of the full committee of that amendment.
Thank you, Delegate Hugo, and you're exactly correct. The patron did ask me and if he could put in this delayed enactment date. I think he is sensitive to the fiscal challenge of this fiscal year, and so he was willing to delay that. Any discussion on the amendment to have the delayed effective date January 1st of 2018? Hearing none, those in favor of the motion to adopt the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That amended bill is before us. Delegate Hugo?
And Mr. Chairman, it was discussion at the committee. Apparently, because of the current tax structure that we have, a number of these large shows, I'm not familiar with it, come to various localities, avoid Virginia. This would allow these shows to come and entertain the opportunity to come to Virginia if this legislation passes. So it was the recommendation of the subcommittee to report this bill 10-0. I so moved.
A motion to report with an amendment, and Delegate Warhawk.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, no question, just an observational comment. Year or two ago, or whenever it was, we implemented saying that gold was no longer a tangible personal property. And I opposed the measure when we did it then. I had the feeling that we were establishing a policy. And consistent with that policy, I lost that battle. We established a policy. It was passed by the House, the Senate, signed by the governor. So I see no reason to oppose this measure, but I just make this comment from the standpoint, I think prospectively we have to look at every piece of legislation, not on its narrow today implications, but what is the policy we're establishing. And I say that also in the context, I suspect we will see further additions to things that will be considered no longer tangible personal property that are of an investment value. So, tree continues to grow.
Right. Any further discussion? That cautionary note, the House Bill 1668 with amendment is before us. The motion is to report. Members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting machine. The clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1668 as amended reports on a vote of 17 to nothing. Delegate Huber.
Mr. Chairman, next up at bat was House Bill 1618 from Delegate Bloxham. What this does is permits localities to impose a TOT, transient occupancy tax, on transit hotel rooms and travel campgrounds in state parks. There was, again, unknown potential gains in the locality, no impact on the state. There were no amendments offered in committee or adopted, and it was the recommendation of subcommittee after the debate to report 5-4, and I so moved.
All right, the motion is to report. Delegate Auroch.
Yeah, whether the subcommittee chairman or the patron, will this attach to any county, whether they otherwise have the authority to levy a transient occupancy tax on lodgings in their establishment or not?
Delegate Bloxham.
Yes, sir, this is only in counties that allow transient occupancy tax.
Delegate Watts.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I was just going to share additional perspective. Well, I voted for this bill. I had a little bit of concern about what the precedent was that we were setting to make the state a tax collector. What I would share with the committee is that over an extensive conversation Saturday morning over coffee with my husband, who has done the legal work for the National Park Service for 40 years, this is a precedent that is followed in national parks throughout the nation. It is nothing unusual to make the government, in this case, a tax agent to collect a parallel tax that is charged in the private sector. So this measure, which evens the playing field, indeed is in line with established policy.
Thank you. Delegate Farrell and then Delegate Bloxham.
Mr. Chairman, I would just say that I hope, speaking to the bill, I hope the committee at least considers one aspect, is that this bill actually I view as leveling the playing field, because you have a lot of private campgrounds and a lot of private enterprises that compete with state parks really with an uphill battle, because the state parks have us as a backer that fund them, and then this has been an advantage where they weren't collecting taxes and the private enterprises had to. So you've got a lot of small businesses that are really at a competitive disadvantage, and this just levels the playing field a little bit for those guys. So maybe it's a bump to the playing field. Thank you.
Further discussion on the motion House Bill 1681. All right, the motion is to report. Members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting machine. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1681 reports on a vote of 11 to 6.
Mr. Chairman, House Bill 1810 from Delegate Knight requires the Department of Tax to provide online access to registered dealers of the names and registration of dealers who are currently registered for the retail sales and use tax. There was no impact to the state or locality. There were no amendments. There was a number of recommendations. I know taxes here. If people have questions pertaining to this, the enactment of this. It was a recommendation of the subcommittee to report 10-0.
All right, the motion is to report House Bill 1810. Discussion on that motion. Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1810 reports on a vote of 17-0. Cody, you go.
Last up, Mr. Chairman, was mine, 1889. It's a provides an exemption for certain defense production businesses. Some of these businesses, they would do like remanufacturing work, would be penalizing. Really, it's trying to attempt to clarify a ruling of the Department of Tax. We worked with them on this. It was supported by many of the defense contractors, Newport News Shipyard and others. One of the questions that arose was how this might impact some of the other localities. There's an amendment that I would ask. I think it's been worked out with localities. They would scope back to basically clarify so that this is not overly broad. And I would move the adoption of the amendment.
All right, and the amendment is
Give me a substitute.
amendment in the nature of a substitute is a clarification which somewhat
Narrows the scope of the
measure. All right. Is there discussion on the amendment that's coming before you presently? Could you point us, or somebody point to us where this measure is changed from in the substitute? Maybe we could get staff or someone who could give us the description.
Mr. Chairman, Steve Hayner with Newport News Shipbuilding. The original bill made a cross-reference to a definition of a defense production company that was in another section of Title 58. It was suggested by a local commissioner of the revenue that was causing some confusion because there was a sentence that followed that talked about other companies and other functions that were not pure manufacturing.
Can you get it right in front of that microphone?
Yes, thank you. I apologize. So the suggestion was made that we take that definition and put it directly in Title 30, in Chapter 37, put it in 3700. The list of definitions. There's no change in the wording of the definition. We just put it in there. We picked up the language that was added in committee that says that in order to qualify for the exemption, you must be both a manufacturer and a defense production company. I would note, Mr. Chairman, that as is always the case with some of these things, a few discussions are still going on, but we'd like to proceed with this language, and we think this language solves our problem, and I'm not quite sure it creates the problem they think it does, but we're continuing to hear their case.
Chairman, like I said, there were I don't think anybody testified against this bill in subcommittee. There's a couple people did. I did walk and I asked a question about it, and I pledged that I'd work with them on this, and this is the average to do that.
Okay. So the motion is to adopt the amendment in the nature of a substitute. Any further discussion on that matter? Hearing none, those in favor of adopting the substitute signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, the substitute is before us.
Mr. Chairman, with that, with the adoption of the substitute, I appreciate all the patrons who worked on it, parties that worked on this. It was a recommendation of the subcommittee to report 10-0 by so moved.
Motion is to report the substitute on House Bill 1889. Discussion? Hearing none, members will indicate their vote on the electronic voting board. Clerk will close the roll. House Bill 1889 reports on a vote of 18-0.
And Mr. Chairman, with that, I think that wraps up the subcommittee report. Thank you, sir.
All right, I believe that completes the business of the House Finance Committee today. Thank you for your considerable work, particularly in the subcommittees and in full committee. With that, we will rise.
Good morning.
I think it's better. I mean, I think if they work a little bit, it might be a little bit better. I think I'm told that well, yeah, he did, but I wasn't sure if we should still vote on it today. Yeah, I mean, it's fine. Yeah. He didn't oppose it, but we'd like it to be tighter because it was written for it. So, I think that's more than what they said we were going to do. Yeah, even with that change, which is kind of an odd change. Yeah, it's still